right, so I think at one time or another, every guy has thought about or fantasized about being a Navy SEAL. You watch the movies, you watch those shows on Discovery Channel where you go inside what it's like to train to be a Navy SEAL, what it's like to be a Navy SEAL, and it just looks freaking awesome, but also incredibly difficult. And my always thought is like, is this something that you're just born to do, or can a Navy SEAL be created? And also, I mean, can we as civilians, even if you don't plan on being a Navy SEAL, are there lessons we can take from Navy SEALs on how to develop mental toughness, emotional and mental resilience, and sort of that focus and vision that the SEALs are famous for? Well, our guest today is a former Navy SEAL, and he has written a book on that topic, on how civilians can take lessons on mental and emotional resilience, on mental toughness, and apply it to their own life. His name is Mark Devine, and he is the author of the book, The Way of the SEAL. In today's podcast, we talk about the Way of the SEAL and how just average Joes can take lessons from the Navy SEALs and apply it to their own lives to improve it in every way possible. So stay tuned. All right, Mark Devine, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much, Brett. Pleasure to be here.
Before we begin, let's talk a little bit about your background, because first, it's so fascinating. And second, it seems like your book, The Way of the SEAL, is a culmination of just these awesome life experiences you've had. So let's start, how did you become a SEAL? Because you sort of had it wasn't your typical route to becoming a SEAL. So tell us, how did this all happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I didn't come out of high school or even college thinking I was going to be a SEAL. In fact, from my upstate New York upbringing, I was pretty much groomed to go into business. My family has a family business that's over 100 years old, and it was just kind of expected that I would get some business experience and then kind of come back and maybe head the charge for the family. And so I did the right things. I went to Colgate University in upstate New York, which is a pretty good liberal arts school. I majored in economics, and I was an athlete, an endurance athlete during that time, but that didn't really mean much to me at the time. But then when I graduated, I got a job with a firm named Coopers & Lybrand, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is one of the big 8 accounting firms back in the day. It was 1985, believe it or not. And so the job was in Manhattan. So I went down to New York City, and they sent me to NYU to get my MBA. And I spent a couple of years cranking away, working as an auditor and then a consultant, and then, getting my MBA at night, and then, sitting for the CPA exam. And so within a short period of time, by the time I was 24, I had an MBA, CPA, and was doing all the right things, right, Brett? I'm just like probably you going to law school and then end up, running Art of Manliness, because you wondered what the hell you went to law school for at some point.
Exactly.
Right. Well, I kind of wondered what the heck I was doing in that corporate world, because it just didn't sit well with me. I didn't really like the people I was around, with all due respect to those folks in that environment. At the time, there was a lot of greed and, a lot of ego and the long hours for really just what amounted to a paycheck. And I didn't, I just had this growing sense of unease. And fortunately, I strolled into a martial arts studio one day, and I was completely blown over by the type of training and the type of people that were at the studio. It was called Seido Karate. And so the founder, Tadashi Nakamura was his name, became my first, kind of real mentor in life. And his training was very much of a integrated whole person nature, meaning that, we worked our asses off on the training floor, but then we would sit in meditation and we would have these discussions, like little, kind of meditation lectures. And also we went to a few retreats up at the Zen Mountain Monastery in New York. And that work, kind of cultivating that, the softer side of myself, I suppose you call it, the meditation and the self-reflection and the awareness development really started to open my mind to, number one, the fact that I was kind of misaligned doing this corporate ladder job. And number two, that I really wanted to go out and challenge myself beyond measure in something that was going to, inspire me and really teach me, leadership and have me lead in kind of messy situations, kind of real visceral type of leadership, which is what, inspired me. And also that was a physical calling, because I really, I loved the physical life, and I obviously didn't appreciate the steady decline I saw of my body. And in my peers. And so one day I was walking down the street and I saw a poster from the Navy Recruiting Command, and it said, "Be someone special." And I said, that sounds cool. And it was for the Navy SEALs. And so I really, that's what first inspired me. So I, began to look into it, and one thing led to another, and pretty much, decided that I was going to head down that road. And so at 25 years old, I bolted from corporate America and went to Officer Candidate School, then through SEAL training. Of course, there's a lot of steps in between here that I'm leaving out, but went through SEAL training in 1990 and was in Class 170 and loved it. Graduated as honor man of my class, and never looked back.
But then, even after even after you did Navy, the Navy SEAL, you retired. I mean, actually, you don't really retire, but you stopped doing that. You actually went back to business, right?
Right. I was 20 years SEAL, but only roughly 9 of that was active duty years, and so I went through my first stint was 7 years. My marriage to Sandy, who was a Coronado girl, which is where the training command is, that kind of sidetracked my active duty career. It was really difficult. I like to say that if the SEALs had wanted me to have a wife, they would have issued me one, because very very soon after our marriage, I was gone for close to 9 months, and through a couple different deployments, and my wife was freaking out and saying, I'm not sure, I thought I understood what I was getting into, but I don't think I can, really hang for a 20-year career like this. And so I was forced to make a choice, and I chose, to keep the marriage and to get off active duty, but I stayed in the reserves. There's a few reserve officers, there's a few hundred SEAL reservists and, a handful of us officers. And so we were able to plug in and do some very, very interesting and important work on the reserve side. So, over the next 11 years, I was mobilized a couple times to active duty to go to Iraq and other places. And, I worked at a variety of commands in different positions doing special projects. And so that's how I finished out my 20 years. And during that reserve time, I was able to go back into business, as you said, and build a number of businesses that were, varying degrees of success. I built a microbrewery in San Diego called the Coronado Brewing Company that's kicking ass to this day. Mm-hmm. No longer involved in that, but I went on to build a NavySeals.com, which is a community and e-commerce website, and my training business called SEALFIT. And now I'm working on Unbeatable Mind, which is, about training mental and emotional and, spiritual toughness, really. So it's been a pretty remarkable career, actually.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like a Renaissance man.
I like that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your I guess business or the training programs you developed, not just for civilians, but for people who are would be SEALs, right?
Right.
And what I found amazing is that through your programs, training programs for buds, you were able to help reduce the attrition rate pretty significantly.
Right. Well, we have to, for my SEAL buddies who will critique me, I have to be very specific.
All right,
about
be specific.
Which we're talking about. So I started back in 2006. I started the nationwide SEAL mentor program, which was a government contract, and we took in the first year alone, we took the pass rate for the candidates, right, who are going into the Navy wanting to be SEALs.
Gotcha.
We took the pass rate from 33% to over 85% on the tests that they took when they show up at boot camp. So before me and the mentor program, only 33% of the candidates even going into boot camp wanting to be a SEAL were qualified. And after my first year of that program, over 85%. That program, went on, and I'm not involved anymore, but that program today has been attributed with increasing the throughput, or said another way, which is the way you said it, decreasing the attrition rate by 3 to 5% at BUDS training. So that's powerful. But then one more thing, because this is a stat I cite in my Way of the SEAL.
Sure.
I went on to create SEALFIT, which is for private, citizens who pay me. It's not a government contract. I don't have a formal relationship with the Navy, but I have SEAL candidates and Spec Ops candidates from around the world who come train with me. And of the SEAL candidates that come train with me and spend, time at my Special Ops Immersion Academy, which is a 3-week, live-in academy that ends with a simulated Hell Week experience called Kokoro Camp. So the guys who want to be SEALs who come, invest that amount of time with me, they have over a 90% success rate getting through SEAL training. So those are the two different stats. One is the stat from when I actually was hired by the Navy, and the other is, the results from the individuals who don't want to be a statistic.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So here's a question. So, what did you find, like when you went in as a government contractor to help these candidates, just get ready, right?
Right.
Like what were the candidates doing or not doing that caused them to not succeed? And how did your training change that? What were your observations?
My observations is a lot of the guys going into the program, and this is, we can translate this conversation to anything in life, anything challenging, right? The SEALs just tend to, are one of the more challenging things you can choose to do in life, right? Well, many of them had there are two ways. They didn't prepare properly because they didn't adequately research and understand the magnitude of the task that they were going to undertake, right? And so, maybe they spent too much time watching SEAL stuff on TV or in a video game, and they didn't really get out and do things like come to my training and find a SEAL mentor and really get out there and spend a good 2 or 3 years preparing for it, because that's really what it takes. So that was one. And the other thing is they had an unrealistic expectation or view of their own competency, right? And so they lacked the awareness to understand their weaknesses, to understand, the mental shortcomings, and to really do the work to shore up their, chances of success and to inoculate themselves against failure. Yeah. So both of those are, with the right training and guidance, are easily overcome, right? You can learn how to prepare properly for anything. You and I could go climb Mount Everest, but we're not going to get on the plane and go tomorrow, right? And same thing with SEAL training. And then, as part of that training, you've got to understand, where your weak points are, where you're going to break, and then you close those openings so that those are strong. And then it's okay for you to focus on your strengths so that you can accelerate. But you got to at least close the openings for those weaknesses. Yeah,
that second observation you made, that everyone overestimates their competency. That gets us. Everyone thinks they're above average, right?
Right.
But that's not possible.
It's not. What's really? This brings up a really interesting thing. I've been toying around with Lumosity, which is brain training. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And I honestly, I do a lot of mental training, and I'm a former Navy SEAL and have an MBA and everything, and so I ripped through a few rounds of Lumosity, and I'm like, man, I must be doing great, And then I check myself against the standards, and I'm like below 50% on every one of them. I'm like, what the hell? Like, you just made me feel like a dunce. Yeah. I better start training,
Yeah. That's really funny.
To your point, everyone overestimates.
Everyone estimates. And I think maybe there's also, I guess, a popular conception that, like, Navy SEALs are born, not made. Like, you either got it or you don't. And, like, buds, well, there is like the sort of the filtering factor that determines whether you got it or you don't.
Right. That's not true at all. Yeah. Physical and mental toughness are developed, right? Now they can be developed deliberately through training, or they can develop by your life circumstances. But either way, they're developed.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk. Let's get into your book, The Way of the SEAL, because basically you take all these life experiences from your martial arts training to your experience serving as a Navy SEAL, your experience as an entrepreneur, and you sort of set out these principles and lay out these principles. And what I found interesting is that as I was reading it, I'm really into this stuff. Right, I'm all into, like, building your mental resilience and meditation. And as I was reading, I was thinking, a lot of people could read this and pick it up, and they thought, oh, this could be like a Navy SEAL book, hoorah! But a lot of people would read it and be like, this is sort of woo woo. It's like visualization, developing your intuition, right? But what I found is interesting is it seems like the military is actually sort of embracing this mental development.
They are. Yeah, very much so.
And so, can you talk about that a little bit? Sure. Did your the principles you laid out, sort of the mental development, did you see some of that used in the military, or is that you're just starting to see that develop now? What's going on there?
The answer is both. It was not prevalent at all when I went through training. Having said that, back in the 80s, there were a couple projects that were kind of forerunners of what we see happening on a broader scale today. The Trojan Horse Project is a good example where they took some SEALs and Green Berets and they trained them in meditation and Aikido and awareness practices, and tested them over the 6-month period, and they found that they were more resilient, they were more focused, they were calmer, and they were performing better, right? And of course, those programs ended up getting scrapped when it just was deemed as impractical, and all it takes is one skeptic to strike a pen through that. And so they didn't really go anywhere. But I remember reading about those and thinking about those early on when I went into the SEALs. And because of my martial arts experience before the SEALs and my experience with meditation, I understood that advanced warrior traditions from many cultures throughout history had used a combination of hard and soft training to develop warriors. And I figured, why should I be any different? Even if the SEALs weren't actively teaching me this stuff, I continued to train on my own, and there were a few other people in the teams that were, had the same warrior ethos that were developing themselves along these ways. And having said that, the nature of special ops really is, there's a couple aspects that really, really support that type of training. For instance, and most notably, is that you really spend a lot of time in silence in the Spec Ops community. You can imagine that, right? We have to sneak everywhere we get, and if you get caught, basically you screwed up. Or you might spend, like for me, 10 hours in a submarine, a mini submarine, surrounded by a cone of cold water. The only thing you can hear is your breathing. Well, then you tend to get, you can either just waste that time and get to the target and do your op, or you can use that time to condition yourself mentally and emotionally and, do some training, right? That internal training, like concentration and deep breathing and stuff like that. And so, there's a lot of opportunity to develop, and a lot of the guys do develop deep intuition and some of those other aspects that come out of that type of training. And the SEALs tend to be very instinctual, intuitive, and accelerated learners because of the nature of the operations and the training that they go through.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then one more thing,
Sure.
I wanted to say is today, first of all, I've trained, hundreds of SEALs now who are in the force, have gotten through, and they've all been doing yoga and visualization and breathing practices, since I trained them. And so, and they're now leading teams. And so it's become a lot more common. And I know a bunch of Marines who are being, getting trained in yoga and mindfulness. And then there's some tests going on. In fact, Dr. Doug Johnson was with us, worked with me at our SEALFIT training center as an athlete. And now he's with Naval Health Research Lab or something like that. And they're actually testing the effects of meditation and breath control and visualization on active duty SEALs. So there's a few, very, interesting and, optimistic type projects going on where, I think, the prevailing view is that within 10 years that this type of training will be commonplace in the military.
Yeah, I did an article about that, sort of researching like biofeedback in the military, right. And they're hoping not only does it make them make people better soldiers, but it could also help with the PTSD that's become very prevalent.
And that's where it all started initially. It's like the rehabilitation of the warriors coming back. But then, there was also another interesting thing with a lot of the EOD guys coming back saying that they, reporting, really intuitive experiences or, insight experiences where they could, sense that there was a bomb in the road right ahead, or they could see, have an image of it being placed by someone. And then they started to pay attention to these, and it saved a lot of lives. And so the another, I'm not sure which group in the Navy is studying this, but they're really studying intuition and the role that played in the combat warrior as well. And so it's going to be both from the post recovery, using the tools to help facilitate recovery from PTSD, but also in the training phase to make the warrior more resilient and more aware, and to be able to handle the chaos and the confusion a lot better.
Very cool. So let's talk about some of your specific principles. The ones that really leaped out to me while I was reading the book was the first one was you have to establish your set point.
Right.
What is your set point, and why is that so important that you do that first?
Well, one of the things that, again, was powerful about the SEAL experience is that we had we very clearly understood where we were at because of the training, right? The training, itself baselined us, and we could see where we were at compared to our peers and where we were at compared to where we needed to be to operate at an elite level. And so, the delta between where we're at and where we needed to be was measured, and then a roadmap was created so that we can get from here to there. And of course, there was to be able to accomplish a Navy SEAL, mission set. And so this idea, what I carried forward into the way of the SEAL and that I try to teach people is that, in order to know where you want to go in life, if you can radar lock on your future mission and your purpose in life, or your purpose and then the mission's kind of tied to that purpose, that's really powerful. But you can't get there until you also know where you are today. Right. And that's your set point. And the elements of the set point are to be very, very clear about your what you're passionate about and what your principles are. And those principles then are going to be like guardrails that guide you and hold you steady as you, progress toward, that future mission and future state that you're looking for. So the set point is like looking deep within yourself and determining, okay, where am I right now? What are my passions? What are my purpose? What are my principles? Where do I stand? Mm-hmm. What are the skills and knowledge that I possess, and what do I need to develop in order to get where I want to go in life? Yeah,
I like that idea of figuring out where you are first before you begin. Right. It sort of takes away the illusion of that I'm above average, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, everyone's got unique skills and stuff, but if you really want to break through to another level and to live an incredible life, you have to step back and acknowledge that, you're probably operating at just a fraction of a percentage, or at at least a small percentage of your potential. Yeah. And that potential is ever expanding as we deepen our own awareness and our creativity opens up, and we start to use the full capacity of our human intelligences. And I say that with a plural S, intelligences. So you have to have a pretty honest and humble acceptance of where you are today, so that you can start driving forward. So
and that can be really hard.
It can be.
It can be very hard, but it's worth it in the end. Like after you establish your step point, then you start talking about what I love about what the way the SEAL is all about, and it's something I'm loving. Because I'm constantly working on this, is developing mental toughness, developing emotional and mental resilience. Right. And so, what are some specific tactics? We talked about meditation, but beyond meditation, what are some other specific things that people can do to develop that sort of mental resilience?
Right. Mental toughness and emotional resiliency are like two sides of the same coin. Right. And so emotional resiliency really is best developed through challenging yourself, putting yourself in circumstances that are very uncomfortable, learning to take some risks and to put yourself out there. And, that causes you to, and that doesn't have to be physical, right? It can be, a task or a skill like jumping out of an airplane, or, just engaging in, really difficult conversations that are hard for for a guy to engage in. And so you got to take risks and you got to open yourself up, and that develops emotional awareness and emotional resiliency. Another thing that develops resiliency is really having really taking your eyes off yourself and putting them on others, and this is another area, again, that guys can be slow to the bat on, right? Women, typically are quicker to be able to serve others. That's the way they're wired. But when men can start to take their eyes off themselves and put their eyes on their teammate and really seek to serve their teammate and to honor teammate, this is a powerful concept for Navy SEALs, because we learn to rely on our teammates with our lives. And so, I had to trust you. In order to trust you, I had to be trustworthy. And, by me taking care of you, I understand that you're implicitly going to take care of me. And so if I had a platoon of, 16 SEALs and I'm watching out for 15 of them, well, there's 15 guys watching out for me.
Yeah.
How cool is that,
That is really cool.
That's a powerful way to develop emotional resiliency. Mental toughness, there's a whole bunch of really cool things that we could talk about. But one of the most powerful ones is to, you keep your front sight focused on your major goal or your mission, but then when it comes to the day-to-day task, you chunk it down into micro goals and really achievable bite-sized chunks that you can, bite off, have a success, note the success, develop momentum and confidence around those small successes. And then, pretty soon you've already achieved the big one without even thinking about it.
Yeah. Very cool. I love that point about developing emotional resilience, focusing on others. Because right now I'm doing a series of articles about attention, right? The science of attention. And one of the things that we've discovered, or research has discovered, is that whenever we start thinking about ourselves, sort of like that, going inward and just think about ourselves, like we tend to focus on the negative.
Right.
Right. And that's what our brain does automatically. We have that bias. So yeah, once you start thinking about yourself, you start getting down, you turn into an Eeyore basically. And what they say is that once you start, like the research is done, like they've done the MRI scans of the brain, that once people start thinking about others, that negativity, the place in our brain that sort of flashes negativity goes away. It silences, it quiets down.
It does. Yeah. Well, you can't, it's the ultimate act of positivity, right?
Yeah.
When you're taking care of someone else, when you're serving someone else, the act is positive by its very nature, and so it eradicates or shuts off any negativity, both emotionally and thought-wise in your body, in your mind.
Very cool.
So you're right. Let me talk about that whole point you just brought up. Mm-hmm. We do have these two sides to our lives: the intentional, which is basically just our own thoughts and feelings and desires. And then the attentional, as you said, which is, how we focus on others and how we interact with the others. I call those two spheres the I and the we, right? The we is the team and the attention, and the I is the intentional. That's just me. And then the we is the attentional. Now, one of the keys to mental toughness is to learn to interrupt and to shift that negativity bias, to acknowledge it and to interrupt it and shift it. And that, that takes a little bit of practice, right? And so the tools that we teach to basically become intentionally positive, to where it's mostly, I'm not going to suggest that you can 100% be positive, because I don't think that's really realistic. Because you're right, the human brain is wired to always be on guard for danger, and your amygdala takes that information and processes everything, and it's got a negativity bias. But you can, and I've proven through my training, you can be aware of it and create a nice gap between the arising of that negative response and your reaction to it. And so within that gap, you have a choice to essentially shift fire and to cancel that out and to move toward positive territory. And that's one of the things I teach. So intentionally, it's very powerful to maintain, to learn how to maintain what I call positivity, which is a positive mental dialogue and a positive imagery and a positive emotional state. And when you do this, it tends to supercharge your performance, because you are able to, really affect others a little bit more positively from an example standpoint. Even if you're not in an attentional stage or, working with another team, your attitude, your optimism, all these things are going to be attractive to the right kind of people, and are going to, put you in their leadership role, because you're motivating, right? And you're optimistic. And so part of being a great leader is to be both intentionally positive and attentionally positive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
yeah. Well, so this sort of leads me to my next question, sort of that, being aware of that negativity bias, or being aware of just what's going on in your mind and your body. So I'm not a law enforcement. I'm not military, but like I do sort of like, I love learning about tactical stuff. And
sure.
One of the things I learned about is the Cooper color code, which you cover, which is sort of like for those of you who don't know, it's sort of a color code that this one, I guess, a gunfighter, right? One of the best gunfighters who really revolutionized gunfighting in America, developed to sort of be this sort of like situational awareness.
Right.
So how do you apply that to a civilian? I mean, because it seems like it's just like, if you got a gun, okay, I'm on yellow, or I'm on red. Like how can you apply that just to a guy who is not carrying?
Well, a lot of it's, about, again, coming back to developing Awareness, you call it situational awareness. I'm going to go back to what I was just talking about. Situational awareness is awareness of what's going on around you in the situation you're around. Well, in order to have situational awareness around you, you also have to have situational awareness of what's going on inside of you. And if you're, a great example that I like to use with my trainees, how many times have you gone shopping, right? And, some women or guy literally is so unaware of you that they literally run their cart right into you, right? And, that practically happens to me every time I go to a shopping, whatever. I go to a store. And so they're clearly not situation aware. Now, what I teach my trainees is that, the color code system, white is ignorance, yellow is passive alertness, okay? And passive alertness is the state that we want to develop to be always in. Now, it doesn't mean you're going around like, sneaking around corners and you're some paranoid nut. No, it just means that you're always scanning. It's like you've activated a radar scan, and your scan is, out there and it's active. It's looking for threats externally and internally. And it doesn't mean you're not having a good time and stuff, but you don't let your guard down. For instance, you go into a restaurant at night and you just scan the environment before you go in, and you just look for anything unusual, and you want to sense, is there anything unusual? Do you get a sense of, something being off? And 99% of the time, you're not going to have any sense. So you're going to walk into the restaurant. But instead of just sitting next to the door with your back to the door and start pounding beers or a glass of wine or something, you'll move to the rear of the restaurant, position yourself with your back to the wall so you can see the entrance and you can scan the environment, and then just have a good time. But, maintain control of your situation, because you're out in public. And anytime you're out in public, you want to be a little bit more cautious and a little bit more alert than if you're behind a locked door in your home, right? Yeah. And so you always have that state of yellow, using Cooper's system of yellow passive alertness, right? Now, let's say, using this restaurant example, some big burly dude comes marching through the front door, and he's starting to move toward you, and you're sitting there with your wife and son, and he's coming straight toward you. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to jack up from yellow to what's called orange, which is active alert. And now orange is like preparing for action, ratcheting up to DEFCON, from DEFCON 4 to 2 maybe. And you don't know what this guy's intentions are. You don't have any clue, yet it seems like danger is coming your way, right? A loud noise would do this for people. If you hear a car crash or screech, and all of a sudden, that's when people go from, either white to orange in their normal life. Well, I'm suggesting, you stay in that state of level and you go to orange when necessary. Now, in my example, let's say this guy is coming toward you, then he smiles, turns, and walks into the bathroom.
Yeah.
Well, you might go back down to the yellow at that point, or you might stay in orange until you see him leave the bathroom and depart the restaurant. But my point is, you're still ready for action. Now you're a little bit more relieved that he didn't take action. You didn't have to escalate you to red, which is, some sort of massive action is going to happen. Yeah.
So I guess the point of it is just it's a way to remind yourself, like, not to be passive in life.
Right. It's part of it is just to think through it and be like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I want to be more alert. But then in the book, I also have drills to really develop that alertness, right? To develop the sensitivity to your, intuitive self, and to develop an awareness of your surroundings. And those are the things that we taught, or we trained for actively in the SEALs.
Very good. So another thing throughout the book, you kind of mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but throughout the book, you mentioned 20X challenges as a way, you need to plan for those. I mean, so what are 20X challenges, and, how do they help forge mental toughness?
Right. To preface this, we, as human beings, we grow through challenge, and you and your listeners are very aware of that. And that's probably a big part of what you encourage people to do, is to get out and challenge yourself. If you can't do pull-ups, then get on the pull-up bar and freaking, challenge yourself to be able to do 10 pull-ups, right? Yeah. And so we grow through challenge. Well, interesting thing about the human experience is, if you don't go for the challenge, if you don't go after it, then the challenge will find you anyways, and oftentimes will find you unprepared, right?
Yeah.
And so that can be in the form of an accident or an illness or, death of a loved one. And now you've got to go through it, but you're not prepared. So what, the 20X concept is that, first of all, you're capable of so much more than you think you are, but you're not going to find it unless you challenge yourself. So go out and find a challenge that's going to prove to you that you're capable of 20 times more than you think you are. For me, the Navy SEAL Hell Week was such a challenge. Now, I don't expect everyone to go join the SEALs and go through Hell Week, right? Obviously, that's not realistic. So, you want to find challenges that are appropriate for your skill level and comfort level and physical, aptitude. But then, you want these challenges to grow in their magnitude, so you're constantly growing. So good examples, like physically, if your listeners are into physical training, some of the challenges that I have my athletes do is like, okay, well, let's do 1,000 push-ups for time.
Wow.
And last time I did this, it's been a couple of years, I did it in 39 minutes, which was cool because that was, that made me feel good. And I knew that, wow, I've still got it, and at 49 years old, then I could still do 1,000 push-ups in 49 minutes or 39 minutes. And it was very, very gratifying for one of the guys who I was doing it with, who did it in 1 hour and 10 minutes, but he finished it. And when he finished it, he felt great about himself. And it wasn't something that he would have done, not everyone just thinks, well, I'm going to do 1,000 push-ups right now. But, how empowering is that?
Yeah.
So I have a whole host of recommendations in the book, and it doesn't have to be physical, right? It can be, like I referenced earlier ago, my stepdaughter, Catherine, just went and did a tandem free fall jump. She'd always wanted to do it. And finally she's like, I'm going to go do this. And man, did she have a ball. And so now she can't wait to get back and to try like her own, static line, which is without the tandem guy, and then something else. So that was a 20X challenge for her. And it expanded her sense of, aliveness and, ability to be in control of her life.
Now, is it a 20X challenge something you do like on a weekly basis or like quarterly? I mean, how often should you plan for these? I mean, should they be like really big, I guess? I mean, I guess the idea is they're supposed to push you, right? Right.
Well, the way I what works for me and what I think is really useful is to have small challenges that you hit up every week. And then you have, a little bit bigger challenge that you hit up, either quarterly or twice a year. And then, to schedule and plan for like a major 20X challenge every year to year and a half. You know what I mean? That would be like that, go climb McKinley or, go to what our 20X challenge that people do with SEALFIT. My company is what's called Kokoro Camp. And Kokoro Camp is 50 hours of nonstop physical training. And it's modeled after Hell Week. And so you give people a taste of Hell Week, but our main thing is to help you get through it and to develop your mental toughness and your emotional resiliency, not to just have you quit. And so we try to get you through it. About 80% of the people who do it will make it, as opposed to the SEAL training, which is 80% don't make it. So that's an example of a 20X challenge that people plan for over a year to a year and a half and train for. And it becomes a big deal for them. And when they come and accomplish it, their life has changed. There's like pre-Kokoro and post-Kokoro life, just like there was for me in the SEALs, pre-SEALs and post-SEALs.
So I'm sure there's guys listening to this podcast. They're thinking like, man, sign me up. This is awesome. They read the book like, this is great. I'm super motivated. But then 2 weeks later, they sort of just like, meh, they fall off the wagon. I think that happens to a lot of people with sort of self-development, self-program. I think it's interesting that your book's called The Way of the SEAL, right? So, I mean, how do you help people get past it? I mean, what advice do you have for people who begin some sort of self-improvement program or building their mental resilience to get past those moments where they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. This is like too much work.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. First of all, in the SEALs, we took a crawl, walk, run approach to training. We had to basically learn how to crawl when we were shooting or jumping or diving. And, there were baby steps. And so, the level of challenge was very doable, and we made it very fun. And we found victory where it was at in that crawl stage. And as we developed our skills and we were more accurate and we were more confident, then we step it up and run a little bit more and work at a little bit more intensity. And then as our competence grew even more, it just kind of began to flow out of us in a more unconscious competency. And so part of the training is, number one, is to look at this as a lifestyle. Gotcha. And to develop a lifestyle around training yourself for ultimate mastery, that state of unconscious competence, in many areas of your life, to include, physical training and, these mental toughness or mental development skills. But you must begin where you're at, which is understanding your set point, and then, do a little bit every day. And so you can eat an elephant, one bite at a time, and you can master yourself one day at a time. And so instead of looking at the end state and saying, hey, I want to be like Coach Divine, or I want to be, like Tadashi Nakamura, who was my mentor. I didn't look at that. I just said, I'm going to come in and train hard today and, try to improve myself by 1% today. But, 1% every day improvement, adds up pretty quickly, right? It ultimately leads to geometric growth.
Yeah.
But,
and then how do you deal with setbacks? Like, say, like, you wake up one day and, like, it just, you were trying to be, like, cool, calm, and collected, but you couldn't keep it together. And you're just like, because that happens to me sometimes, like, man,
sure,
I screwed up today. I'm just going to give up, So how do you deal with setbacks with, like, with the way the SEAL, method? To be
attached to, not be attached to the outcomes of those things. Like,
Gotcha.
You do the best you can. And one of my daily training drills is called the evening ritual. And the evening ritual really it's a look back at your day, and then it's a silver line. You find the silver lining. So anything you did, if you're comfortable and happy with the results, you acknowledge that. Hey, I did a good job with that. That was cool, good. So you're developing confidence. But then anything like you just suggested that really didn't sit right with you, like you screwed up or you really embarrassed yourself, or that kind of situation where you just want to throw in the towel, you basically look at that and say, what, I'm not perfect, I tried my best, what can I learn from that situation? And you will inevitably find a really important lesson when you get out of your own way and say, okay, yeah, that's the lesson there. Mm-hmm. And so then you clear the ground and you go to bed that night with a victory, so everything was a victory, even your screw ups. And so then, you get up the next day and you do it again, right? And you just do the best you can, try to improve by 1%. And then you look back at the end of the evening and say, okay, what did I do well? What didn't go so well? And then what did I learn from those? And then so turn the failures into victories, and then just keep on rolling forward. And, it tends to be very motivating. You really, I call it a lifetime of no regrets, right? In fact, there's a great quote. It's like, better to suffer the temporary pain of discipline than a lifetime of regret. Yeah. And that's one way to do that.
It's awesome. Great stuff. Well, thanks. I appreciate the advice. So your book, Way of the SEAL, is directed at both genders, both men and women. Right. And I know that both men and women can attend your training camps, right? Right. But is there something specific or a specific benefit that you think men can get from following the Way of the SEAL?
Absolutely. I think that what I've noticed in society is that with people who find SEALFIT, it's very much of an aspirational and an inspirational training. And when people start to train the way that I recommend, which is what I call integrated warrior development, meaning we're actively not just trying to kick your ass, but we're trying to make you a better human being. And I focus on 5 human, capacities: your physical development as a human, your mental development, your emotional development, your intuitional development and awareness. I use those 2 words interchangeably, and then your spiritual development. And we train those through our different training methods, so that you develop in a more balanced manner, and it leads to kind of an accelerated growth and a greater sense of being in control, and you feel really good about yourself, and you feel like a man. You feel really freaking solid. And a lot of people, look to the SEALs and say, wow, guys, you're kind of like the modern day Spartans, mm-hmm. And it's very aspirational. People think SEALs are all studs. And, physically they are, mentally they're smart, but it's because they train for it, right? They're not just, we're not just born this way. We've decided that we wanted to be unique and wanted to, show up as uncommon in the world. And so we train for it, but if a SEAL gets out of the Navy and stops training, guess what? He's going to backslide until he's kind of common, and I actually know a couple guys who backslid and got into alcohol, and then, they were pretty damn common and miserable, right? And so it's the training that's the secret sauce, and the training in a lifetime manner. It's every day. It's not just for an event, and to train in an integrated manner so that you're covering all these capacities, so you don't grow unbalanced and teeter-totter over someday.
Very good. Well, Mark Divine, this has been a fantastic conversation.
Hoo-yah.
Thank you for your time. Hoo-yah indeed.
Yeah, it's been great. I really appreciate it, friend.
Our guest today was Mark Divine. Mark is the author of the book, The Way of the SEAL, and you can find that on Amazon.com. Well, that wraps up another edition of the Art of Manliness podcast. For more manly tips and advice, make sure to check out the Art of Manliness website at artofmanliness.com. And if you'd like to support our podcast, really appreciate it if you would go online to whatever service you use to listen to your podcast, whether it's iTunes or Stitcher or whatever, and give us a rating. That'll help us be exposed to more listeners and help the podcast grow. And so until next time, this is Brett McKay telling you to stay manly.